The morning sun cast long shadows across the military firing range as Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his red tunic. At 32, he had served as a Queen's Guard for 8 years, standing motionless outside Buckingham Palace while tourists snapped photos and made jokes about his inability to react. What they didn't know was that beneath the ceremonial uniform lived a man who had once been among Britain's most elite soldiers. The other guards gathered around the shooting stations, their voices carrying across the open field. Marcus had volunteered for the monthly marksmanship training, hoping to maintain the skills that had once made him legendary in the Special Air Service. But his fellow guards saw only the quiet man who rarely spoke about his past. Look who decided to join us, called out Corporal Jenkins, a younger guard with barely 3 years of service. Our silent statue wants to play soldier today. The group chuckled as Jenkins picked up his rifle with exaggerated confidence. Hope you remember which end the bullets come out of, Marcus. Palace duty doesn't exactly prepare you for real shooting. Said nothing, simply nodding to the range instructor and taking his position. His hands moved with practiced precision as he checked his weapon, muscle memory from years of combat training taking over. The familiar weight of the rifle felt natural. In his grip, like greeting an old friend after a long absence. 10 pounds, says the ceremonial soldier, can't hit the broadside of a barn. Jenkins whispered to the others, loud enough for Marcus to hear. All that standing around has probably made him forget how to actually use a weapon. More laughter rippled through the group as they placed their bets. The range instructor, a grizzled warrant officer named Patterson, watched the exchange with growing irritation. He'd served long enough to recognize something in Marcus's demeanor that the younger guards missed entirely. The way the man held himself, the careful efficiency of his movements, the calm focus in his eyes, these were not the traits of someone playing at being a soldier. "Gentlemen," Patterson barked, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "If you're quite finished with your comedy routine, perhaps we can begin. Standard qualification course today. 300 meters, prone position, 20 rounds." He gestured toward the distant targets, barely visible white dots against the brown backdrop. Marcus settled into position, his body automatically assuming the perfect shooting stance he had learned years ago in the windswept training grounds of Hereford. The jokes and laughter faded into background noise as he controlled his breathing, feeling his heart rate slow to the steady rhythm he had mastered during countless operations. Jenkins took his position nearby, still grinning as he aimed downrange. "Watch and learn, boys," he called out. "This is how a real soldier does it." His first shot rang out, followed by his triumphant shout, "Bull's eye, beat that statue, man." The other guards cheered and congratulated Jenkins as he continued firing, each shot accompanied by boastful commentary. His grouping was respectable, the kind of shooting that would earn him praise from his instructors and bragging rights among his peers. For a ceremonial guard with limited combat training, it was genuinely impressive performance. Marcus waited patiently for his turn, ignoring the continued taunts and jokes directed his way. He had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words, and that the most dangerous opponents were often the quietest ones. His fingers traced the familiar grooves of his rifle stock as memories of distant battles flickered through his mind. When Patterson finally called his name, Marcus moved to the firing line with unhurried confidence. The range fell silent as he settled into position, his movements economical and precise. He had done this thousands of times before, in training and in the field, where missing the target meant far more than hurt feelings or lost money. The first shot came without fanfare or announcement. Marcus simply exhaled, found his natural respiratory pause, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth pressure he had perfected over years of practice. The rifle bucked against his shoulder with familiar authority, and somewhere downrange a target acquired a perfectly centered hole. Jenkins stopped bragging as the spotting scope confirmed what everyone suspected, but no one wanted to believe. The quiet guard they had been mocking all morning had just demonstrated shooting skills that belonged in an entirely different league. The easy laughter died away, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that stretched across the firing range like morning fog. Marcus continued firing with methodical precision, each shot followed by the metallic ping of the spotting scope confirming another perfect hit. His breathing remained steady, his grip unchanged, as if he were simply going through the motions of an everyday task. The other guards watched in stunned silence as their assumptions crumbled with each successive bullseye. "Jesus Christ," whispered Guardsman Phillips, lowering his binoculars with shaking hands. "He's not missing. Not even close to missing." The target downrange looked like it had been attacked by a surgical laser. Each bullet hole clustered in a group smaller than a man's fist at 300 meters. Jenkins had stopped shooting entirely, his rifle forgotten as he stared through his scope at Marcus's target. His own respectable grouping suddenly looked like the work of an amateur by comparison. The easy confidence that had carried him through the morning evaporated like steam, replaced by a growing realization that he had been mocking someone whose skills existed on an entirely different level, range. Instructor Patterson moved to stand. Behind Marcus, his experienced eye tracking the impossible consistency of each shot. In 30 years of military service, he had seen gifted shooters, competition marksmen, and elite soldiers. But the performance he was witnessing belonged in a category beyond simple talent. This was the result of training so intensive and complete that it had become instinctive. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Patterson asked quietly, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there an hour earlier. Marcus completed his string of fire before responding, his movements unhurried as he made his rifle safe and rolled out of position. "Here and there," he said simply, brushing dirt from his uniform. "You pick things up over the years." But Patterson wasn't satisfied with evasions. He'd spent enough time around Special Forces soldiers to recognize the signs: the controlled breathing, the economy of movement, the way Marcus's eyes constantly scanned the environment even during a simple range exercise. "That's not range time talking, son. That's combat shooting." "Who trained you?" The question hung in the morning air like smoke from the rifle barrels. Marcus met Patterson's stare with calm eyes that revealed nothing, but the other guards sensed something significant passing between the two men. Jenkins felt his earlier bravado curdling into embarrassment as he began to understand that he had been ridiculing someone whose credentials he couldn't even imagine. "Maybe we should focus on the other shooters," Marcus said diplomatically, gesturing toward the remaining guards who still needed to qualify. "They're waiting for their turn." But the spell was broken. The casual atmosphere of friendly competition had been replaced by an uncomfortable awareness that they were in the presence of someone whose abilities made their own seem childish. The remaining guards went through their paces with subdued concentration, their earlier joking replaced by nervous glances toward the man they had been mocking. As the morning progressed, whispered conversations began among the guards. Phillips remembered hearing rumors about Marcus's previous service, stories that had seemed too dramatic to believe. Jenkins recalled the way Marcus moved during ceremonial duties, not with the stiff precision of a parade ground soldier, but with the fluid awareness of someone accustomed to danger. "I heard he was infantry before the guards," murmured one of the younger soldiers, "but that's shooting. It's not regular infantry level." "My cousin served with some paras who talked about a Thompson," added another. "Said he was something special, but they wouldn't say what unit." Marcus heard the speculation, but continued cleaning his rifle with the same methodical care he applied to everything. He had learned long ago that the less said about his past, the fewer complications arose in his present. The Special Air Service valued secrecy above almost everything else, and that discretion had become second nature to him. Patterson approached as the session wound down, his curiosity finally overcoming his professional restraint. 20 years. "I've been running this range," he said conversationally. "I've seen Olympic shooters, SAS selection candidates, Marine snipers. Your grouping just beat them all." Marcus secured his rifle case and straightened his uniform. "Some days are better than others, warrant officer. Probably just luck. Luck doesn't put 20 rounds through the same hole at 300 meters." Patterson's voice carried the authority of someone who knew the difference between skill and chance. "That's muscle memory from thousands of rounds downrange. That's training that costs the government serious money." The other guards had gathered their equipment and were heading toward the transport vehicles. No, but their conversations remained focused on the morning's unexpected revelation. Jenkins walked in subdued silence, his earlier arrogance replaced by the uncomfortable realization that he had been making jokes about someone whose combat experience likely dwarfed his own. As Marcus packed the last of his gear, Patterson made one final attempt to penetrate the mystery. "The boys are curious about your background," he said carefully. "Might help with morale if they understood they're serving alongside someone with your qualifications." Marcus paused in his packing, considering the suggestion. He could see the wisdom in Patterson's words. Respect built on understanding rather than mystery might indeed improve unit cohesion. But the habits of operational security ran deep, and some stories were better left untold. The ride back to barracks passed in unusual quiet. The transport vehicle that had been filled with jokes and laughter on the way to the range now carried a subdued group of guards, lost in their own thoughts about the morning's events. Marcus sat near the window, watching the London countryside roll past. While sensing the curious glances directed his way, Jenkins finally broke the silence as they neared the base. "Marcus," he said hesitantly, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "About this morning. I may have been out of line with some of my comments." Marcus turned from the window, his expression neutral. "No harm done, Corporal. We all have different backgrounds and experiences." But Jenkins wasn't satisfied with the polite dismissal. The image of Marcus's impossible accuracy haunted him, along with the growing realization that he had spent months making jokes about someone whose military credentials likely made his own service record look insignificant. That shooting, though. Where does someone learn to shoot like that? The question drew the attention of every guard in the vehicle. They had been wondering the same thing, constructing theories and sharing rumors, but none had the courage to ask directly. Marcus felt the weight of their curiosity and understood that his continued evasions were only feeding more speculation. "Selection and training take many forms," he said carefully, choosing his words with the precision he applied to everything else. "Different units have different requirements." Patterson, riding in the front passenger seat, caught Marcus's eye in the rear view. "Mira. Thompson, your file lists previous service as classified operations. That covers a lot of ground." Marcus had been expecting this conversation since the moment his first shot found its mark. Military records told stories to those who knew how to read them, and Patterson had clearly noticed details that raised questions. The vague entries and redacted sections that protected operational security also served as breadcrumbs for experienced soldiers. "Some assignments require discretion even after they're completed," Marcus replied. "I'm sure you understand, Warrant Officer." But Phillips, emboldened by curiosity, pressed further. "My mate served with 3 para. He said there was a Thompson who went through Hereford. Said he was one of the best natural soldiers they'd ever seen, but he just disappeared one day." The silence in the vehicle became profound. Hereford was synonymous with one thing in British military circles: the Special Air Service training facility where the most elite soldiers in the armed forces earned their wings. The mention of the name hung in the air like an unspoken question that demanded an answer. Marcus felt the familiar tension that came with exposure. For years he had maintained his anonymity among the ceremonial guards, content to serve quietly and leave his past buried in classified files. But combat skills had a way of revealing themselves when called upon. An exceptional marksmanship was difficult to disguise as mere luck. "A lot of soldiers pass through Hereford," he said diplomatically. "Selection courses, cross-training, liaison duties. The name Thompson isn't exactly uncommon in the military." Jenkins studied Marcus's face, searching for confirmation of what they all suspected. The pieces were falling into place. The quiet confidence. The way Marcus handled himself during crisis situations at the palace. The almost supernatural calm he maintained regardless of circumstances. "But you did serve there, didn't you?" The question hung between them as the transport pulled through the barracks gates. Marcus could see the fork in the road approaching, continue the evasions that had served him well, or acknowledge a truth that would fundamentally change his relationships with his fellow guards. The decision carried implications beyond simple conversation. "I served where I was needed," he said finally. "Same as every soldier in this vehicle." Patterson turned in his seat to face Marcus directly. "Son, I've been in this army for 3 decades. I've seen parade ground soldiers, combat veterans, and everything in between. What I witnessed on that range this morning wasn't standard military training. That was elite-level marksmanship maintained through years of practice. It's the kind of shooting that keeps people alive in hostile territory." The vehicle stopped in the motor pool, but no one moved to disembark. The conversation had reached a critical point where polite evasions were no longer sufficient. Marcus could feel the weight of their expectations, their need to understand who they had been serving alongside without realizing it. He made his decision with the same calm calculation he had once applied to life-and-death situations in distant countries. "Warrant officer, perhaps we could continue this conversation in private. Some discussions are better held away from open vehicles and curious ears." Patterson nodded with understanding. Military discretion had its own protocols, and some conversations required proper setting and security. "My office in 30 minutes, Thompson. And bring your service record. The complete one, not the sanitized version they give to ceremonial units." As the guards filed out of the transport, Marcus felt the familiar weight of secrets about to be revealed. The quiet life he had built among the Queen's Guard was about to change, but perhaps it was time. Perhaps these men who had stood beside him in ceremonial duty deserved to know they had been serving alongside someone whose previous life had been dedicated to protecting their country in ways they couldn't imagine. Asterisk. Marcus stood before the locked filing cabinet in his quarters, staring at the key he had kept hidden for 8 years. Inside lay a manila folder containing documents that told a story he had tried to leave behind. Commendations, mission reports, and photographs from a life that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. The folder felt heavier than it should when he finally retrieved it. On the cover, stamped in red letters, were the words that had defined his previous existence. Classified SAS operations, eyes only. Below that, its operational designation from years past. Trooper 7242, Marcus Thompson, Counterterrorism. Team. Walking toward Patterson's office, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The transition from special operations to ceremonial duties had been his choice. Made after a mission in Syria had gone wrong in ways that still haunted his dreams. Standing motionless outside Buckingham Palace had seemed like penance, a way to serve his country without the weight of life-and-death decisions. Patterson was waiting with 2 cups of tea and an expression of professional curiosity, tempered by respect. The older soldier had clearly seen enough classified files to understand the significance of what Marcus carried. "Close the door, Thompson. Something tells me this conversation requires privacy." Marcus settled into the offered chair and placed the folder on the desk between them. "Before we begin, warrant officer, I need your word that this stays between us unless operational necessity requires otherwise." "You have it," Patterson replied without hesitation. "Now help me understand what I witnessed on that range this morning." Opening the folder felt like opening a door to the past. The first document was Marcus's original selection notice for SAS training dated 12 years earlier. Patterson's eyes widened as he read the details. Exceptional performance in every category. Recommended for immediate advancement to operational status. "You were 20 years old when you passed selection," Patterson observed. "That's unusual. Most candidates need more experience before they're ready for Hereford." Marcus nodded, remembering the brutal months of training that had pushed him beyond limits he hadn't known existed. "I was motivated. My father served with the regiment in the Falklands. Lost him to an IED in Afghanistan when I was 17. Next documents painted a picture of a soldier who had excelled in the most demanding military environment in the world. Counterterrorism operations in Northern Ireland, hostage rescue missions in Africa, deep reconnaissance patrols in the Middle East. Each mission report was marked with the same assessment: exceptional performance under extreme conditions. "Good God," Patterson whispered, reading a commendation for a mission in Iraq where Marcus had single-handedly held off insurgent forces while evacuating wounded civilians. "This says you eliminated 12 enemy combatants with precision rifle fire, while providing cover for a medical evacuation." The citation calls it superhuman marksmanship under combat stress. Marcus remembered that day with crystal clarity: the weight of the rifle, the controlled breathing between shots, the desperate urgency of keeping the evacuation route clear. It had been one of many missions where his shooting skills had meant the difference between life and death for innocent people. "The training never leaves you," he said simply. "Muscle memory doesn't understand the difference between combat zones. In firing ranges..." Patterson continued reading, his respect growing with each page. Operations in Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, places where British forces officially didn't exist. Conducting missions that would never appear in newspaper headlines. Marcus's record painted the picture of a soldier who had spent nearly a decade fighting the country's enemies in the shadows. "This explains the shooting," Patterson said, "but not why you left. According to this, you were being considered for Squadron Sergeant Major. Men like you don't typically request transfer to ceremonial duties." The question touched on memories that Marcus had spent years trying to bury. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the parade ground where new recruits practiced their drill movements with youthful enthusiasm. Syria, 2016. Counterterrorism. Mission in Aleppo. Patterson waited patiently, understanding that some stories required careful telling. The classified nature of SAS operations meant that few people ever heard the complete truth about what happened in the dark corners of the world where these soldiers operated. "We were tracking a high-value target bomb maker responsible for attacks in London and Paris. Intelligence suggested he was planning something massive for the Olympics." Marcus's voice carried the weight of old wounds as he recounted the mission that had changed everything. The operation had gone perfectly for the first 72 hours. Marcus's team had infiltrated the city, located their target, and prepared for extraction. But intelligence had been wrong about enemy strength, and what should have been a surgical strike became a running battle through urban terrain against overwhelming odds. "My spotter took shrapnel in the first exchange," Marcus continued. "Kid named Davies, barely 22. I had to choose between completing the mission and getting him to medical treatment." Patterson understood the implications without explanation. SAS operations often required impossible decisions where success came at the cost of human life. The weight of those choices accumulated over time, grinding down even the strongest soldiers until they reached their breaking point. "I completed the mission," Marcus said quietly. "Davies died in my arms 20 minutes before the extraction helicopter arrived. The bomb maker was eliminated, the Olympics were safe, and I was awarded another commendation for exceptional service." Under fire. The silence stretched between them as Patterson absorbed the story. He had seen enough combat veterans to recognize the signs of survivors' guilt and moral injury that came with impossible choices made in the fog of war. "After Syria, I couldn't pull the trigger the same way," Marcus continued, his voice steady but distant. "Not because I'd lost the skill, but because every shot reminded me of choices I'd made. The regiment offered counseling, extended leave, even transfer to training duties. But I needed something completely different." Patterson leaned back in his chair, processing the magnitude of what he was hearing. The file before him documented a career that belonged in military legend, a soldier whose skills had helped prevent terrorist attacks and saved countless innocent lives. Yet the man sitting across from him had chosen to spend his days standing, motionless in a red tunic, protecting the monarchy through presence rather than violence. "So you requested transfer to the household division," Patterson said, understanding beginning to dawn. "From the most active unit in the British military to ceremonial duties?" Marcus nodded, remembering the puzzled reactions from his superiors. When he'd submitted the paperwork, the colonel thought I'd lost my mind, said I was throwing away a career that could have led to command positions, staff college, maybe even regimental command someday. The irony wasn't lost on either man. Marcus had walked away. From military glory to find peace in what most soldiers considered the least challenging assignment in the army. Standing guard outside palaces and participating in state ceremonies seemed like a waste of exceptional talent to anyone who knew his background. "But that's exactly what I needed," Marcus continued. "Duty without killing, service without moral complexity, protecting something beautiful instead of destroying something ugly." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Underdog. Voice carried authority as he called out, "Not now. Official business in progress." But the voice that answered belonged to Jenkins, and it carried an urgency that couldn't be ignored. "Sir, we have a situation developing. Security alert at the palace, multiple suspects, possible terrorist threat. All available personnel are being recalled immediately." Patterson and Marcus exchanged glances, both understanding the implications. Whatever was happening at Buckingham Palace would require every available guard, regardless of their ceremonial role or combat background. The comfortable world of parades and tourist photos was about to collide with the darker realities that Marcus had tried to leave behind. 5 minutes, Thompson," Patterson said, securing the classified documents. "Full kit, ready to move." As Marcus hurried to his quarters, muscle memory took over in ways it hadn't for years. His movements became economical and precise as he donned body armor and checked weapons that he had hoped never to need again. The weight of tactical gear felt familiar despite the years of ceremonial dress, reminding his body of skills that had never truly faded. The transport to the palace carried a group of guards who were suddenly facing the reality that their roles might extend far beyond ceremony. Jenkins sat quietly beside Marcus, his earlier bravado replaced by nervous energy and growing awareness that he was about to see his mocked colleague in an entirely different context. "What do we know?" Marcus asked Patterson, his voice carrying a tone of professional competence that hadn't been there during ceremonial duties. "Armed group attempted to breach the outer perimeter," Patterson replied, consulting his radio messages. 3 suspects detained, but intelligence suggests there may be more. Palace is in lockdown, royal family secure, but we need additional security presence until the situation is resolved." Marcus felt the familiar sensation of operational focus settling over him like an old coat. The hyper-awareness, the constant evaluation of threat levels, the mental preparation for violence, all the psychological tools that had kept him alive during years of combat operations were reasserting themselves. As their vehicle approached the palace, Marcus could see the signs of heightened security that were invisible to civilian eyes. Police vehicles positioned for rapid response, officers moving with the controlled urgency of professionals managing a crisis, and the subtle indicators that suggested this was more than a simple security scare. Thompson, Patterson said quietly, "I know you came to the guards to get away from this kind of situation. No one will think less of you if you prefer to handle perimeter security while others deal with any active threats." The offer was made with kindness and understanding, recognizing that Marcus had left combat operations for valid personal reasons. But as they approached the palace where he had spent 8 years standing peacefully, Marcus felt something stirring that he hadn't experienced in Syria, a sense of purpose that transcended personal comfort. "Warrant, officer," he said, checking his rifle with movements that had become automatic over years of training. "Someone is threatening the people and place I've sworn to protect. That makes this personal." Jenkins watched Marcus's transformation with fascination and growing respect. The quiet guard who had endured months of jokes was revealing himself to be exactly what the situation required: a soldier whose combat experience and protective instincts made him uniquely qualified for whatever was about to unfold. The vehicle stopped at the palace gates, where armed police officers and security personnel were coordinating response efforts. Stepped out into the London evening, no longer a ceremonial guard playing at being a soldier, but a veteran special operations trooper returning to the role he had been born to fill. The security briefing took place in the Palace Command Center, where Marcus found himself surrounded by armed police, intelligence officers, and senior military personnel. The atmosphere was tense, but controlled, with the professional efficiency that marked genuine crisis response rather than panic. "We have confirmed sightings of 2 additional suspects who evaded the initial sweep," the senior police commander announced. "Intelligence suggests they may be attempting to reach the state apartments. All entry points are secured, but we need teams to systematically clear the building." Marcus listened with the focused attention he had once applied to mission briefings. In war zones, the palace he knew intimately from ceremonial duties was being described as a tactical environment, with corridors that could provide concealment and rooms that might harbor threats. Thompson, the commander continued, consulting his roster. You'll be with Alpha Team for the East Wing. Your knowledge of the building layout will be valuable for navigation. But Patterson stepped forward with information that changed the entire dynamic, sir. Sergeant Thompson has additional qualifications that might be relevant to the current situation. He glanced at Marcus, who nodded permission to continue. Says 12 years operational experience, including counterterrorism and close protection duties. The briefing room fell silent as the implications sank in. Marcus felt the familiar weight of expectations as the other personnel reassessed their assumptions about the quiet guard who had been assigned routine duties. The commander's expression shifted from polite acknowledgement to professional interest. Is your assessment, Thompson? The commander asked, treating him as the subject matter expert he had suddenly become. Marcus moved to the building schematic displayed on the wall, his trained eye immediately identifying vulnerabilities and advantages that civilian planners might miss. If they're trying to reach the state apartments, they'll avoid the main corridors where cameras and guards are most concentrated. The service passages offer better concealment. His finger traced routes through the palace that he knew from 8 years of ceremonial duties, but now evaluated through the lens of tactical movement and threat assessment. The building that had been his peaceful sanctuary was becoming a three-dimensional chessboard where lives hung in the balance. There are 3 likely approaches, he continued, but this one offers the best combination of concealment and access. He indicated a route that passed through areas where he had stood guard countless times. During state functions, Jenkins watched with amazement as Marcus transformed from mocked colleague to respected tactical advisor in the span of minutes. The man who had endured jokes about being a statue was now directing armed response teams with the confidence of someone accustomed to life-and-death decision-making. I know every inch of that corridor, Marcus said. If you're going to intercept them, that's where you'll have the best advantage. The commander nodded, but his next words addressed the elephant in the room. Thompson, your experience makes you the most qualified person here for this kind of operation. Would you be willing to lead the clearance team? The question hung in the air with weight that transcended simple military duty. Marcus had joined the Queen's Guard specifically to avoid situations like this, seeking the peace of ceremonial service after years of combat operations. But the palace under threat wasn't an abstract mission objective. It was the place he had protected through quiet vigilance for 8 years. Sir Marcus said, accepting the rifle and tactical gear being offered, it would be my honor. Next hour unfolded with the controlled intensity of a perfectly executed military operation. Marcus led his team through corridors he knew by heart, but now moved through them with the hyper-aware caution of someone expecting contact at any moment. His years of ceremonial duty had given him knowledge that proved invaluable in the tactical environment. Movement, second floor, came the radio report as they approached the critical corridor Marcus had identified. 2 suspects, armed, moving toward the state apartments. Marcus felt the familiar calm that had once carried him through firefights in distant countries. His breathing steadied, his heart rate slowed, and his hands found the perfect grip on his rifle as muscle memory took over. But this time, he wasn't fighting for strangers in foreign lands. He was protecting a place that had become home. The encounter, when it came, lasted less than 30 seconds. Marcus's voice cut through the radio chatter with the quiet authority of someone completely in control of a dangerous situation. Suspects neutralized. State apartments secure. No casualties among response personnel. As the all-clear was announced and normal security protocols resumed, Marcus found himself surrounded by colleagues who were seeing him clearly for the first time. Jenkins approached with something approaching awe in his expression. Why owe you? An apology, Jenkins said quietly. All those jokes, all that mockery, I had no idea who you really were. Marcus removed his tactical gear and straightened his uniform. The familiar weight of ceremonial dress replacing the tactical equipment he had hoped never to need again. We all serve according to our abilities and the needs of the moment. Corporal, today required different skills than usual. Patterson appeared with the classified file that had started the day's revelations. Think this might be the end of your quiet service, Thompson? Word of today's performance will reach people who remember your previous work. Marcus looked around the palace that had been his sanctuary for 8 years, knowing that everything had changed. Secret was out, his skills had been displayed, and the peaceful anonymity he had sought was probably gone forever. But as he prepared to resume his ceremonial duties, he realized something important had changed within him well, perhaps it's time, he said, watching tourists beginning to gather outside the gates as normal life resumed. Perhaps I've been hiding long enough. The next morning found Marcus at his usual post outside Buckingham Palace, but the jokes and mockery from passing guards had been replaced by respectful nods and genuine admiration. He stood with the same motionless discipline he had maintained for 8 years. But now his colleagues understood that beneath the red tunic stood a man whose service to his country extended far beyond ceremony. The tourists still took their pictures and made their comments about the silent guards, never knowing that one of the motionless figures had spent the previous evening protecting them from threats they would never imagine. Marcus had found his peace not by abandoning his skills, but by using them in service of something worthy of protection.